Hello everyone, we are today at the Panzermuseum Munster and I'm here with Tobias, a former Leopard 2A6 gunner, and I recently conversed or chatted a bit with a German combat engineer serving in Ukraine, and he basically mentioned a few months ago, hey, a Wiesel would be really great to have here at the front lines. And I made a video about it and he was quite happy with it, and he then bugged me, or he basically chatted me up again and said, hey, I recently talked with a British Scimitar commander and we talked about the possibilities to use these tanks. And he specifically mentioned like they would be ideal, for instance, where he was fighting at that point was basically there were just wood lines and it was just infantry combat most of the time. So there were no RPGs and all the mines they found were anti-personnel mines. And he, for instance, suggested that like you have like a vehicle like a Wiesel or a Scimitar that supports the infantry with its autocannon, and like in the last 50 meters it would just charge in, because any mines that would be there would basically explode but not really damage the tank or the anti-personnel mines, or maybe detrack it. And then you immediately also have like an autocannon as well to defend against any counterattack. He would also like, it's ideal for fighting light field fortification and trenches and mines, and also light tanks for recon to clear trails. And what is especially he mentioned is like the Wiesel is very good for passing through wood lines, which you can't do with a regular tank. And you had training exercise in your Leopard against the Wiesel. So what is your experience with?
Yeah, with the Wiesel especially, it's very narrow compared to other vehicles, and it makes it possible to drive actually through a forest and not necessary to always follow paths that are like predictable, that the enemy predicts vehicles there. But with the Wiesel itself, if you think about it, the armament of it is comparable to an IFV to a certain degree. So you have like this fire support of an IFV, and the IFV was designed to give fire support to infantry.
Also IFV is infantry fighting vehicle like Marder, BMP-2, or of course the Bradley.
Just minus the transport capabilities of the vehicle, obviously. But there are different kinds of Wiesels, for example the ones with ATGMs, but also like the medical version. Maybe you can purposely use it as transporting troops. Who knows? I mean, we saw a lot of stuff getting improvised in Ukraine. And with the Wiesel, what you said with this charging, I wouldn't rather do this, because at the end it's a light tank, it's lightly armored. Yes, it will survive infantry weapons, and in forests the danger of RPG is far less. But there's not only RPGs that can destroy vehicles. For example, for the 40mm grenade launcher, there's the high explosive dual purpose grenade. That has like a small shaper charge, but it should be enough for...
I should add here, he specifically mentioned enemy trenches often weakly supported even by machine guns, also no RPGs. And so he specifically mentions that they barely have machine guns, it seems. So in that sense, you probably would do it.
I mean, you would do it for the first time, but I would also say that maybe the Russians will adapt to it.
Yeah, then they would definitely adapt to it. But then they would have to also redeploy some weapon systems.
Yeah, that's always the thing. One side does A, the second side does B.
Tactics
and to react
counter
to it.
tactics,
Yes.
yeah.
But in general, you have to think about these weapons. They are potent, and even this autocannon, it will deal with other IFVs and other smaller vehicles, and even light fortifications. And it's like an IFV, just on a smaller scale. And especially the Wiesel is very small, even if you compare it to other smaller vehicles like the Fennec of the German army, or BMPs. For example, BMP-2 has a similar firepower than this. And yeah, it has its advantages. It could be used, I'm sure, but that's not up to us to decide.
Do you have any experience with swarms or bogs?
Swarms? Well, for example, in Lithuania, it's a lot of this. And swamped areas also not good for tanks. I mean, you have always, in the area of operation, you have to check the ground pressure, if the ground pressure will hold your vehicle. I'm not sure about how it's for the Wiesel exactly, the ground pressure, but for example, for Leopard 2, two people standing on each other shouldn't sink in. That's like the ground pressure you need to effectively operate a Leopard.
So you hacked each other?
Principally, yes. And if you don't think in, it's a good ground pressure. If you think in, it's not dense enough the ground. That's one thing with all vehicles. I mean, wheeled vehicles have bigger problems than tracked vehicles, obviously, because you have far less ground pressure. But that would be a question for. I mean, you can theoretically calculate it by the size of the tracks and its weight. So it shouldn't be that rocket science.
Yeah, because he specifically mentioned that in the south of Ukraine they have swamps and bogs there, and that should be good terrain for the British Scimitars, if they should be delivered or something along those lines. So
I think there was also the other. I mean, they had 2 light tanks, the British Scimitar and I think Scorpion.
Yeah,
there are 2 of them. I'm not that aware of them, of their benefits. I mean, I only as a German know this Wiesel, and it's high regarded in the German army, the Wiesel, because of its mobility and its size. The firepower speaks on its own.
So yeah, I mean, many people basically complained, yeah, Wiesel makes no sense, and they say, yeah, an RPG will kill it and everything else. First, hitting this thing with an RPG when it's in full movement, I think it must be a pretty good shot. The other thing is artillery, like some people also mentioned artillery rounds. Yeah, well, artillery round also kills the Leopard. 155 direct hit will kill it. A close hit will damage enough to put it probably make it a mission kill. Of course, if you get a close hit on this thing, it's a total kill. But then again, it's harder to hit, and because it's way more mobile and you don't use this, you use it quite differently. I mean, you fought against them. I think you specifically mentioned that they appeared quite often at positions where you didn't suspect.
Yeah, like I said, you can predict them because they are not forced to follow roads and paths. That's the point. And one thing that has to be said, every vehicle can be destroyed. Every weapon system can be destroyed. And a vehicle that at least is slightly armored is still better than infantry. And this will outgun every stationary PKM machine gun. And that's often the problem, that this trench is getting defended by PKM or even Dishka machine guns, and where the infantry gets pinned down. I mean, a Dishka could cause damage to this vehicle, but a PKM should get outgunned easily, even on longer distances where you can.
So Dushka is 12.7, I think.
Yeah, the big one.
And the PKM is 7.62, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then there's RPK in either 7.62, 39, or 5.45.
Yeah. So yeah, one main point is that there is no wonder weapon, no miracle weapon out there, basically, that
no game changer.
There is anything, yeah, no game changer, and the enemy will definitely adapt. But if a combat engineer basically serving in Ukraine tells me, hey, this weapon system in my current situation would make a lot of sense because, and he talked with Wiesel commanders and now also with Scimitar commanders, and they seem to agree with him. I think that's a valid point, because there were some people that say, yeah, it makes no sense at all or something. And of course, that does not mean that he's completely right or that doesn't make an error, but it seems a very valid opinion because I think for now he served more than a year over there. Of course, there's also downtime, of course. So, but and I don't know. So it's like, yeah. And of course, there might be people over there that have a complete different opinion, and they might also have valid points. So, as always, and these videos are generally there to discuss and bring new ideas and look at different weapon systems in a way that give you a better idea, and also me a new idea, because I would also not have thought about using a Wiesel in Ukraine, and he said, hey, okay, that would be great here. And I said, okay, why? What are your points? And then he lined it on and I said, well, it makes a lot of sense. And he specifically mentioned, like, you have like this terrain in Ukraine where you have large plains, but you don't move there, and then they are separated by wood lines. And these wood lines are too small to hide a tank, but they're perfect for a Wiesel to move in there. So, and usually in these tree lines, all the defensive positions are like sometimes trenches, sometimes not. And now he mentions, yeah, but they usually only defended by regular infantry that sometimes doesn't even have a machine gun. So there are no RPGs and many other weapons, or like automatic grenade launchers. And so if you bring up a few Wiesels, then you might generate at least a break-in or even a breakthrough. Of course, the Russians then likely will react and deploy stronger weapons there, but it's about breaking sometimes through, and sometimes if the enemy can't react fast enough, as we saw in 2022 in September when the Ukrainians made a major breakthrough, then something like this can happen. And sometimes if the front collapses, there's also always the psychological question. So a minor break-in might develop into a rout because suddenly Wiesels manage to break through, and then they might get behind the enemy lines, and then they will take, okay, now for psychological reasons or something else, the front breaks up. So there's some valid points. Of course, a lot can go wrong as well.
I mean, these vehicles were designed to be air transportable by helicopters. So these vehicles were built actually to fight in a more irregular combat situation and not in a mechanized combat environment. So to be deployed behind enemy lines with paratroopers, for example, and cause damage there. Before that, there was, for example, in the German army, the Kraka, this small vehicle that was only a gun platform, but it was not armored. Yeah. This vehicle was armored. And therefore, it was designed for irregular combat. It was designed for working together with paratroopers in forested area, in urban areas and stuff like this. And it was not designed to fight in a mechanized environment with main battle tanks, IFVs, self-propelled howitzers and stuff like this. It's a complete different brand of army.
And if they have former Scimitar commanders and other people over there, they also would know how to properly employ this, because they know the strength and, of course, the weaknesses of their vehicle. And so, that is something where we should keep in mind. Anything to add?
Nothing so.
Okay, then thank you very much, Tobias. Thank you to the Panzermuseum Munster for inviting us. Thank you for watching, and see you next time. Bye.